Hi everyone, my name is Richard Pugh, Chief Data Scientist and co-founder of Mango Solutions, and welcome to this snapshot of the Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation. This presentation is really to help organizations to demystify some of the key terms around the world of data and analytics in order to understand what's possible, identify the right opportunities, and educate the business at large to enable that data-driven transformation. So in this session, I'll start by quickly giving you an overview of the background to the Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation and introduce myself. I'll then talk a bit about the hype-driven data world. We'll talk a bit about this phrase data-driven, and we'll get on to the core components, if you like, of the Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation, which is really around some of the keywords. And today we're going to focus on the word analytics in the broadest sense. So we'll start with a little background. Let me introduce myself very quickly. So as I said, my name is Richard Pugh. I'm Chief Data Scientist and co-founder of Mango. My background is I'm a trained statistician and data scientist. My career has really revolved around some of the data science core technologies. So I used to be a SAS statistician, if you like. I then started using a tool called S Plus and eventually evolved into the R community, where I've worked primarily over the last 20 or so years. I co-founded Mango Solutions in 2002. So that organization was really set up to help organizations to take advantage of data science and some of the evolving techniques and tools in that space so they can actually turn data into value. And these days, I spend a lot of my time giving advice to leaders who are looking to become data-driven or use data science to add value. I work for Mango Solutions. Mango Solutions is a data science consultancy. We help our clients to really embed data science so you can actually turn data into value in a repeatable way to support that data-driven transformation. And we tend to help our clients in one of three ways. We tend to provide advice around what's possible to enable them to understand and build the right strategy and the right culture internally. We help to actually deliver data science outputs and projects. So that could be using things like advanced analytics, machine learning, etc. And we also help organizations to build their own capabilities, so their own team, set up the right platforms and processes to succeed. And this Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation is really from a series of workshops and presentations that we've built to help organizations to educate the business at large about the possibilities and the language of data and analytics. Now, that could be a real barrier to really affecting that journey and that transformation, if you like. So within this series, we see four sort of areas that we've really focused on. The Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation, which is, this is a snapshot of. The Building a Data-Driven Company workshop, which is really a series of presentations and guided discussions for leadership in an organization who are considering or attempting to create a data-driven company, if you like. Then we have a series of discovery workshops. These were developed between us and Google. The focus of these workshops are really to help organizations to identify and prioritize and plan the right opportunities. So one of the big pitfalls, if you like, of data science is brilliantly solving the wrong problem. And so this is really focused on ensuring that we collaborate well with the business to actually create, and actually focus on exactly the right challenges to go after. And lastly, we have our broader data and analytics literacy workshop called Being Data-Driven, the Language of Analytics. This is really about helping the organization and the business at large to understand the key terminology within the world of data and analytics. So what does the word model mean in a business context, and how do you collaborate effectively on an analytic project, etc. So for this session, we're going to focus on Nevermind the Buzzwords. So this is a presentation that's given within an organization to talk about some of the opportunities that data and analytics presents us, but also to talk about some of the hype and some of the buzzwords around advanced analytics. So words like AI and machine learning, data science, etc., to understand what these terms really mean and how we can see through that hype, if you like, to understand what the pragmatic steps are in order to add value with data. And this session is really a snapshot of that Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation. So we're going to start today by talking a bit about the hype-driven data world. So I'm sure you've all heard this phrase, data is the new oil. Now, this quote goes back to about 2006, where mathematician Clive Humby used this phrase to describe data as this, the world's most valuable asset. So it's no longer oil, but it's data. And this is pretty exciting. It's a great catchy phrase, and it has nice connotations, right? So data needs to be refined, right? It's incredibly valuable, etc., etc. And if you're interested in this phrase, by the way, ever since that quote, if you like, there have been endless articles written on why data is or isn't the new oil, right? So, obviously oil is finite, data perhaps isn't. Maybe it's not a good phrase because data can be reused and so on. But essentially, that's kind of where we start from. And if data is the new oil, then I would say that phrases like AI, machine learning, data science, deep learning, etc., these phrases that really abound in this environment are the new snake oil. So in the 18th and 19th century, entrepreneurs would sell an elixir called snake oil as a cure for every illness, okay? And of course, this elixir wasn't in any way a medicine, and in fact, it didn't include anything to do with snakes. And I suppose that the phrase snake oil salesperson essentially became synonymous with that idea of selling something that is not really a panacea. And it feels a bit like the data and analytic industry in the last few years and today is really in this space where there's so much hype about how AI and predictive analytics is this kind of magic that you just wave a wand and wonderful things happen, and the hype is coming largely, I think, from large technology vendors selling sort of silver bullet, analytic solutions, right? You just build this data lake, you just buy this AI platform, and magic happens. And the practitioners in the area will kind of tell you this is just not true, right? And I think that there's two things that have been exaggerated here, I suppose. One is the overall value that can be gained from these approaches, but also, perhaps more importantly, the ease at which you can arrive at the value. And this is also seen on the Gartner hype curve, which tracks innovations, if you like, and looks at the hype around these different concepts. And the Gartner hype curve is it's a really good thing to look up. It has these different stages. So the innovation trigger, then the peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, which is where we all don't want to be, the slope of enlightenment, and eventually, of course, this productivity piece. And I think the interesting thing here is that if you look at terms like big data and data science and machine learning and deep learning and so on over the last few years, you'll see that a lot of these things will reach this peak and then almost get reinvented and called something else and then start again. So we've kind of seen this cycle now over and over again. But essentially, this is really driving a lot of interest from leaders who are looking to invest in data and analytics in order to, because they've read the hype, they understand this is the way of the future and so on. So that's kind of where we are. And if you put yourself in the shoes of a business leader today, then if you look at the market and try and get some advice and make some sense out of this world, then you're met with this. So you're met with all sorts of terminology and yellow elephants and robots and unicorns and phrases like data driven, big data, AI, deep learning, analytics, machine learning, data science. It's incredibly difficult to understand the pragmatic and practical steps that an organization should take in order to add value, because there really is value to be had, and I think the approaches around data analytics can really add significant value to an organization. But I think this just makes it impenetrable for most. The other thing that's really difficult is that most of these terms don't really have a specific agreed meaning, if you like. A lot of these terms have come out of marketing campaigns by large vendors who have used a phrase like AI or data science or whatever it is to as a way of essentially marketing or selling a piece of technology. And even at a ground level, the terms change and the meanings change quite rapidly, and also they get misused quite a lot as well. So I think a lot of practitioners, I'm sure, in the data science space these days have been, I've seen instances where you've got something that is simple, that someone's fit a linear regression somewhere, and the next minute someone's talking about that as an AI solution, and so these terms are used and abused quite a lot in this space, which again makes it really difficult. So the aim of the Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation is really to try and see through this, to really demystify this world where buzzwords abound, where AI and and machine learning and deep learning are other the go-to terms, and really to understand what these things actually mean and what it means for us in terms of how we go about adding value, what the practical steps and some nice examples are of success in this area. So that's really what the Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation is all about. And so we're first going to talk about essentially the so what question, right? So why do we want to do this? What is the actual point of investing in data, investing in analytics? What do we all believe we're going to get out of this? And I'm going to do that by talking about one particular buzz phrase, if you like, which is this phrase data-driven. Okay, so this section is really all about what it means to become or to be data-driven. So let's start with the prediction. At Mango, we believe that future success in business will largely depend on an organization's ability to take data, to turn it into wisdom, knowledge, if you like, and to use that knowledge to make better decisions and drive cost savings. That's basically what the premise is. And I think we've seen all sorts of examples of this over the years, whether it's Moneyball, whether it's, the richness of data that, surrounds the kind of COVID pandemic world. We've seen the advantages of data and insight and knowledge to allow a business to just fundamentally outperform and make better decisions, right? If you've got two organizations that are alike in every way, except one is making better decisions, there has to be a kind of Darwinism effect, if you like, where that business wins out. And so that's where this phrase data-driven has come from. And our definition of a data-driven company is one that essentially values data as a primary asset and integrates it into the DNA of its business, right, of its decision-making process. So this is not data as a siloed, anecdotal research activity. This is fundamentally data as a way of doing business. And the phrase data-driven, a lot of people, there are lots of different phrases in this area. You could be talking about being data-enabled, data-informed. I've heard someone describe their company as, trying to be wisdom-centric, which is quite an interesting one. But essentially, whatever phrase works in your culture, right, and inspires you, it's really all about how you take data and you put it at the heart of your organization to drive your business. And so people often ask me, what does data-drivenness feel like, right? So if you imagine, you've reached this nirvana state, this aspirational state where your company is 100% a data-driven organization, what does that feel like in that moment? And the analogy I like best is this moment in the Harry Potter stories where Professor Slughorn, who's this chap here, gives Harry a potion. And the potion it has a technical name I can never remember, but essentially it's liquid luck. Okay, so Harry takes this potion, and after he takes the potion, every decision Harry makes is exactly the right decision to make. Okay, so let's imagine Harry's going off to fight Voldemort or something like that, and you would think he could do that best by turning left. Instead, he turns right and goes somewhere else. And it turns out that was exactly the right decision to make in order to achieve Harry's outcome. And we're not talking about here making, almost the right decision. We're talking about making exactly the right decisions. And so this aspirational state of data-drivenness for me feels a bit like this, right? It feels a bit where, imagine that you've got a big jug of this liquid luck potion, and it's on your reception desk in the morning, let's say, and every time, your employees walk into work, they take a glass and they take a big drink of this liquid luck, and then all day they make exactly the right decisions. Okay, so what decisions do they make? Well, they might be who to hire, it might be which price to use, which product to invest in, it might be how they speak to a customer, it might be how they spend the time they have that day optimally, right? But essentially what they do is all your employees make exactly the right decisions all day. That's what this aspirational state, I think, of becoming data-driven or being data-driven, for me, feels like. Now, of course, that feels like some sort of nirvana that maybe can't ever be reached. But I think data-drivenness for me is all about improving the, if you like, the rightness of decision making, right? So that's kind of why I like that analogy. And so when I talk about data science and becoming data-driven and so on, I tend to focus on decision making. And decision making is quite a nice, if you like, structure to use, because it kind of evokes that idea of, building bridges between business and analytics around, can I just make a decision better? Okay. Now, in order to achieve that, of course, you need to understand your business as business drivers as being a series of successful decision making processes. But there are other things that I think that data science and analytics, advanced analytics can achieve, and those are things like automation, obviously, so reducing cost from the business. So if you've currently got a very expensive manual process, we could potentially automate that using machine learning, using RPA, and so on, in order to kind of reduce costs. And the other thing, of course, that we can do with data science and advanced analytics is really to help to optimize your customer interactions, so providing richer, more personal experiences, and better marketing, if you like, in order to gain and retain customers. But I think that the decision-making piece feels really nice. And actually, I have no organizations, for example, there's one insurance company who built their entire practice or analytic practice around decision making. And so from a board perspective, if you said, do you have a data science program, they would have said no, but they do have a decision improvement program, which was, a program to iteratively improve the ways decisions are made. So again, it's a nice example of how, the kind of language, if you like, around this can really fit an organization well. And so because of all this hype and, all the expected benefits that data analytics can bring, a lot of our organizations are investing heavily in data analytics and embarking on what they call a journey, right? So if you go to any of the data or analytic conferences, the word you'll hear over and over again is organizations talking about being on a journey. And the word journey itself is interesting, right? Because, a journey is really defined as traveling from a starting point to a specific destination, right? And one of the things I find interesting when I talk to organizations is very often the destination can be a little vague, right? It can be not quite clear. So I actually learned this wonderful word, this old English word recently called coddywomple, which is a fantastic word. A coddywomple, if you're on a coddywomple, you are traveling purposefully towards a vague destination. And I think that understanding why you're on the journey and understanding what you hope to achieve at the end and what your organization will look like at the end is a really important part of a successful transformation, right? So, and if you don't have a clear understanding of your destination, then you really are perhaps on a data-driven coddywomple, not a data-driven journey. And I think one of the things that you have to consider as well on the journey is that people see that the data analytic world as being this kind of very technical world, and there's definitely pitfalls around how you transform, right? So if your data transformation is really all about technology, what you're really doing is you're innovating around your data platforms. That's not a data-driven transformation. That doesn't move the business, right? So one of the things to really be careful of when you're thinking about your journey, and this is kind of a concept that we use over and over again when we help organizations build proper strategy, is to make sure you're balancing the effort across the different pillars of data-driven transformation. So that is strategy, that is data and technology and governance and platforms and so on, absolutely. But it's also about building the right capability internally, the right delivery mechanism. And at its heart, it has to have that cultural transformation. Because fundamentally, becoming data-driven is about change. It's about going from where you are today to a different way of doing business with data at the heart of your organization, driving success. That's really what data-driven transformation is all about. Okay, so I hope that gives a bit of context in terms of the so what, right? In terms of why would someone want to go on this journey? Why would someone want to engage with big data and analytics and data science and modeling and machine learning and AI? Why would you get involved? Well, these are the reasons. It's about change. It's about becoming an organization where data and analytics is really at the heart of your decision-making processes. That's kind of what it's about. But back to what I started with, on this session, when you actually look to this world, the terminology and the buzzwords and the hype can make it really, really difficult to understand, well, what's my first step, right? What's the pragmatic thing I can do today to really move me towards that kind of aspirational state? And so our Nevermind the Buzzwords presentation is really all about these keywords, right? These words that you'll hear over and over again, like big data and analytics and data science and stats modeling and machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc., etc. Those are some of the keywords that you'll hear in this industry. And this presentation is really all about demystifying these words and saying, well, actually, what do these words really mean? Why should we care, essentially? And, how should we go about getting value from, say, machine learning and so on? So what do we need to know about these things in order to identify the right opportunities and actually generate value? That's what this presentation is all about. Now, for this snapshot, we're going to focus on one area. We're going to focus on the word analytics. But if you're interested in the full set of words and want to do more of this demystifying, then obviously at the end you see my contact details. Please get in touch and we can talk about the full program. Okay, so what is analytics? Now, for me, this word is incredibly broad, as we'll see in a second, but also is probably the key word to understand in order to give people in the broader business the tools to be able to understand and identify and discover high value opportunities. So I think for me, the reason I picked on this word in this snapshot, if you like, is because it really is the foundation to really discovering the right projects. Because a lot of these terminologies, right, a lot of this terminology around things like machine learning, for example, they really are inspirational technologies, absolutely, and techniques, absolutely. But from a business perspective, they are the ways of achieving something, whereas the word analytics really talks about what's possible to achieve. Okay, so if you Google the word analytics, okay, the first entry that you'll find is the Wikipedia definition of analytics. So I thought I would just put that up here and just talk about this for a second. So the Wikipedia entry, which does actually, I think, quite a decent job of describing analytics, it talks about analytics as the discovery and communication of meaningful patterns in data. Okay, and it goes on to talk a bit about being valuable in areas with rich recorded information, relies on stats, computer programming, OR, etc. But fundamentally, it talks about the discovery, communication, and meaningful patterns in data. Now, that's an incredibly broad kind of definition, if you like, right? So anyone who is, let's say, got a spreadsheet, who has got 5 numbers in the spreadsheet and they're calculating a sum, let's say, well, that's kind of analytics, right? But also, if you're doing some sort of visual thing, if you're looking at a graph and you realize that the graph goes up or down, we're currently, I'm recording this during the COVID pandemic, for example. You're seeing lots of graphs and stats coming out about, flattening the curve and so on. So that's analytics. But also at the other end of the scale, you've got, PhD level, really sophisticated, algorithms that drive some aspect of maybe the finance industry, let's say, or drug development. That's also analytics. And so the challenge with the word is that its application and its meaning is too broad. So what we need to do is to actually break down the world of analytics into its constituent parts and give ourselves a better understanding of the different types of analytics and how they can be used in our organizations. So, and you may have seen this chart before, but I'm going to talk around this. There are actually 4 levels of analytics, okay? At the base level, we have something called descriptive analytics. So this is really all about the study of what happened, right? So it's basically using historical data to understand what has gone on in the past or up to this precise moment in time, okay? So this could be things like, how many widgets did I sell last month? What was the temperature yesterday? Okay, what's the current load on a server, let's say? Those summaries, if you like, that boil down lots of information into simple elements is really descriptive analytics. And descriptive analytics, we interact with every day, right? So anytime anyone calculates a total or an average, or maybe receives a report or sees a graph, you're basically dealing with descriptive analytics. It's that idea of taking lots and lots of information and boiling it down to a simple visual or a simple number or a simple report or a simple table that allows us to understand what that broader data source, if you like, represents. So the next level is diagnostic analytics. So this is really moving beyond what happened into the study of, well, why did that happen? Okay. So imagine that you're looking at descriptive analytics and you're looking at sales figures, let's say, from last week, and you'll notice there was a big spike on a Tuesday. Diagnostic analytics is really understanding, well, why was that a spike? What happened there? And how do I explain that result, right? So it's really looking at, the factors that influence some output. So why was it, was it the weather? Was it, a particular campaign that you'd run? Was it, something else that happened in the market, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at the study of the why. And in order to do this, you need kind of modeling and stats modeling and machine learning, etc. But that's just the kind of That's the how you do it, right? But basically, the fundamental is diagnostic analysis is understanding why things happened. And understanding why things happened is really important because you can do a few things, right? You can understand, if you understand why something happened, you know if it will happen again. But also you can also use diagnostic analytics to understand whether something influenced something, right? So, was it that campaign, or did that campaign make any difference whatsoever, or was it only part of the difference? Yeah. So that helps you understand a lot more about the mechanics of a particular output you're interested in. At the next level, which is obviously a buzz phrase in its own right, if you like, is this idea of predictive analytics. So what might happen? Okay. So typically this involves forecasting. Typically this is kind of, people think about this as being in the future what will happen. And that's a large part of predictive analytics. But it could also be what would have happened if we behaved differently, right? So it could have been, okay, well, if we hadn't done that campaign, we'd done a different one. Can we understand what might have happened then? Okay. And so the idea here is, again, you need modeling for this, and it's based on, typically your historical patterns, and you make lots of assumptions about, well, if this has happened in the past, what might happen in the future, and so on. And predictive analytics, right, is really interesting right now during this COVID pandemic because, we haven't really had, a situation like this in recent history, and therefore, when you're using predictive analytics, when you relying on what's happened in the past in order to understand what happens today, this is why a lot of our models are broken today, right? Because actually we haven't seen this before, and therefore, we can't really model what would happen during the pandemic because we haven't got the data and so on. So predictive analytics is about understanding what might happen. One of the ways we come across predictive analytics in our day-to-day lives is of course the weather forecast, right? So we're all used to understanding that we can look at the weather forecast, or we can ask Alexa, whatever it is, and we can understand what the weather might be tomorrow. But we also understand there is a margin of error in this, right? We understand that it's not just, oh, it will be exactly this temperature, it will definitely rain. We're talking about more like, well, actually, it will probably rain, and the temperature is probably in this ballpark. So we already get the idea of that kind of error mechanism, if you like. But predictive analytics can be really, really useful to help us to understand what may happen, what's the range of possible outcomes, and what's the likely error, and so on. And then if we move beyond that, the last level, if you like, of analytics is prescriptive analytics. Now, this is an area that people, I guess, shy away from. It's actually quite a complex thing to achieve, but it's actually the area I think that best talks to or is most comfortable, if you like, in the kind of business context. Because prescriptive analytics is all about, well, given what I understand, what is the best course of action I should take in order to maximize or minimize some outcome? Okay, so the idea here is basically, if I understand what happened in the past, if I understand what might happen tomorrow, given that, how should I best behave in order to maximize revenue or minimize cost or minimize waste or whatever it is? So that really talks directly to some of the business challenges that we see day to day. Now, another way of thinking of these levels of analytics, if you like, is how much thinking is the computer doing and how much thinking am I doing? If you like, as you go up this chain, what you can see is, of course, going up this chain is more and more complex, right? It's harder to achieve. But essentially what you're doing is you're allowing the compute to do more of the thinking than you are. So I'll give you a simple example, right? So I once gave this presentation from a hotel in Berlin, right? So I was in a hotel in Berlin, I was there for a conference, and I gave this presentation to a client remotely. Because I was in this hotel in Berlin, we started talking about, well, how would the hotel use analytics? And so it seemed to fit quite nicely as well. In terms of the story that we were talking about, was things like, that hotel manager has probably got a dashboard, a report or something that tells them, how many occupants they had last week, right? So maybe last week on the Tuesday, let's say, there was a spike in occupancy in the hotel, okay? Now, if that's all you've got, if you don't do anything else, then, you're essentially, the hotel manager has to say, well, why was that a spike? I wonder if it was because of this. Ooh, that might happen again this week. I better go and do something about that, right? So you can see that the human brain's having to do a lot of the thinking, if understanding the why and what might happen and what the implications are and so on. Whereas actually, if you go up this complexity curve, if you like, what you end up with is the computer can tell you perhaps, why it happened last week. So maybe there was a conference that happened or a concert that happened, let's say, in Berlin that made that spike. And predictive analytics might say, well, actually, it was about, it's because of the weather or because of, a concert of a certain type, and that might happen again next week. And therefore, we believe that the occupancy will spike next Thursday, let's say, and it will spike by an extra 100 seat, rooms or something like that. But then the top level is really about the so what. So it's basically, that's the point where if you get to that level, you can say, well, actually, given that we know the occupancy is going to go up, you should go and hire more staff, buy more food, do this, do that, which is actually the fundamental decisions that the business person is trying to make there in order to maximize some output, which in that case might be profit and so on. So that's kind of where this kind of, if you like, the range of the different analytic concepts really helps us to understand what's possible and how to ask good questions in a business setting. And generally, by the way, just to add a bit more terminology, you might have come across descriptive analytics. It's actually also referred to as business intelligence. So any dashboard or report or something like that you get, that's basically BI. And then the other things, because they require modeling, we call those advanced analytic techniques or advanced analytics. This really helps us to understand how to ask fundamentally better questions of our data, okay? So if we take a really nice example, which is customer churn, right? So customer retention or customer churn, however you want to look at it. So how do I retain my clients? If you're just using descriptive analytics, you're basically talking about understanding how many customers maybe churned last month. So what happened? Diagnostic allows us to talk about, well, why was it that levels? Why was it a particular spike? Why did they churn? Why did it go up or down last month, etc.? So what was it about what we did or what the broader environment was and so on that meant that those customers churned? Predictive analytics approach to churn would be about understanding, well, how likely are existing customers to churn, right? So, is this customer or this customer more or less likely to churn? And that's usually where a churn project stops. So usually a churn project stops with essentially a set of probabilities, right? So you end up with a customer and the churn likelihood is 62%, let's say, right? So this customer is 62% likely to churn in the next month. And the challenge with that is it really fails the so what test, right? Because if I told you that a customer was 62% likely to churn next month, what do you do with that? 62% is, well, it's kind of in the middle, right? So maybe we do nothing, or maybe we do something, but what is it do we do? And so really a churn project that stops at understanding churn likelihoods doesn't really add masses of value to us. Really, the most useful question to ask is, how do I retain my high value clients, right? So actually that customer who's 62% likely to churn might not be adding much value at all. It might be, okay, just leave that, but maybe there's some other customer who's maybe 30% likely to churn, but actually is massively high value and you should do something about that. And actually, in terms of retaining a client, maybe there's like 3 options you can do, right? You can give them an offer, or you can just talk to them, or something else. Which is the optimal, if you like, the optimal approach to use. And so that's really what prescriptive analytics is about. It's about behavior. It's about understanding what's the best course of action in order to achieve some outcome for us. And that's where, like I say, that's where really analytics is where we can find really good opportunities in the business, where we can just ask really, really good questions about how we should behave to maximize or minimize some output that I'm interested in. So I'm going to leave you, if I may, with a few examples that will hopefully provide some inspiration as to the sorts of questions that could be asked. These are really good examples, primarily of prescriptive analytics, that really talk about the idea of how we connect the data and the analytic possibility to actually the behaviors that we take day to day. So this example is from the world of financial services, but it actually kind of is quite broadly applicable, which is the idea of next best action. So what is exactly the next best action I could take? And that speaks again back to that whole Harry Potter thing of what is the right behavior? What's my next decision to make? Now, within the world of particularly retail, there's this lovely phrase which is know your customer, right? So KYC, and I've always struggled with that phrase because for me it kind of fails the so what test, right? So if I know my customer, so what? Really, I need to know how best to interact with my customers in order to achieve some outcome. Okay, that's really a better, if you like, a better question to be asking. And so this is an example of a project that we did with a customer where we designed and built a next best action engine. So, within their call centers, they had hundreds of call center staff talking to customers, every day. And we incorporate elements of understanding of churn. So how likely is it for customers to churn? We looked at things like upsell and cross-sell opportunities. And so what we were able to do is to give the call center staff really good tools and insight to help them to understand exactly what they should be saying, what should they be pitching, what should, what price, what product, etc. And this has drastically increased both the retention rates of this customer, but also the cross-sell and upsell product revenues as well, which is really exciting. And we're currently working with this customer to look at incorporating things like tone of voice and also call center allocation. So, for example, if a call comes into the call center, knowing what I know about this customer at that point, if it's like a online to offline journey, let's say, what's the best person I can actually direct that call to in order to maximize some outcome. So this idea, this concept of, actually what should I do? What's my exact thing I should do? How should I say something, etc., is a really nice broad example of prescriptive analytics, right? Which is all about, what's the optimal behavior to maximize some outcome. And the outcome, of course, in itself could vary, right? So it could be a, lifetime value, it could be profit, it could be revenue, it could be retention, etc. But yeah, so that's a really nice example. So this is a kind of similar idea, which is from the world of insurance here, and it's all about portfolio optimization. So another phrase means a lot of things, across lots of different industries. But in this context, what we're talking about is a situation where an insurance company has many brokers out there in the world who are selling their insurance. And when we started talking to this client, what happened is that once a month there would be pricing that would go out to the brokers, and the brokers would print off the Excel spreadsheet and take it, run in their briefcase, and sell insurance, right? So what we wanted to do is to do two things, I suppose. One was to firstly understand attribution. So that is really understanding what are the most profitable parts of your business, right? So if you've got people out there selling insurance to, let's say, hotels or, I don't know, shopping malls, or, what is it that makes that insurance company the most money? Which is actually sometimes quite a difficult thing to understand, right? So where is the most profitable part of your business? And then once we understand that, right, maybe it's, we understand that actually the most profitable parts of our business are, I don't know, shopping malls that were built after 1990, let's say, or hotels that had a specific wiring before or after a certain date, right? So once we understand where the really profitable areas are, it's being able to dynamically influence the price to incentivize people towards the most profitable business. So this is quite a nice, this is from the world of insurance, it's quite a nice idea, this idea of nudging a portfolio towards its optimal state, where you're using pricing as a leverage, if you like, to move it to a state where you want to maximize, in this case, you want to maximize profit, right? So that's kind of a really nice idea of, and I think it's very generally applicable, of moving your portfolio towards a point where it's most profitable based on understanding of what the most profitable areas of your business is. That's a really nice project that can, a nice idea that can be applied to lots of different scenarios and industries. So the next example is a really good, I suppose, quite classic example of prescriptive analytics, and that's preventative maintenance. So the idea here is that you've got some event that may happen in the future. Typically something like, you've got a water pipe, let's say, and the pipe might burst at some point. And what you do is you are able to understand when something might happen, so you can plan and proactively go and, if you like, kind of alleviate that risk. And this is kind of really important for things like, the idea that if you've got a reactive repair of some sort, that might, be very costly for you. It might have a lot of impact, and not just kind of monetary, but for example, we did a project with oil pipelines in Alaska, where we did a preventative maintenance project there. And, the outcome, if you like, the side effect of a pipe burst is not just the money, not just losing the product, but also the kind of environmental impact and so on. So you kind of have this idea of being able to understand what's coming, so you can optimize your maintenance schedule, behave in the correct way to minimize the likelihood of some sort of failure in some sort of system. And this works all over, really. We've done, for example, projects around pipelines, but also around things like proactively repairing kitchens for a housing association, so that you don't have that reactive repair disruption and so on. The next example is a really nice example because it's a really good example of asking or a situation where you get towards the right question. And this is, so this was for a company that was a film distribution company, and they were interested in us helping them to predict box office take. So a film comes out on the weekend, how much revenue is that going to generate for the organization? And, and it's really tempting to just kind of go, okay, well, I've heard the word predict. How do I predict box office? Is it based on the film, the actors, maybe is it a sequel, and so on. So you've got a lot of ideas you can go and start with. But we sat and we said, well, why are you trying to achieve this? What you're trying to do with the outcome? And eventually, after one of our workshops, we managed to realize that really the question wasn't, can you predict box office? We eventually had a stakeholder say, well, if we know what the box office revenue will be, we know how to optimize our marketing spend. And it was really about optimizing marketing to spend to achieve a specific shape of revenue, if you like. So we said, oh, great. So the question really is, how do you optimize your marketing spend? That's a very different question. And I suppose it was interesting for a couple of reasons. One was, the reason that we weren't asked that question originally is because the stakeholders didn't really understand the limitations of analytics. So they literally didn't realize they could ask that question. And the second thing, which was good as well, was that could have been a classic data science project where you hear predict box office, you run off, you do a brilliant job, you spend a lot of money, let's say, and ultimately it's not really, kind of doesn't really have a lot of impact on the business. So a really good example there of ensuring that you get to the right question before you start a project. And my last example, just quickly, is so my background is I'm from the pharmaceutical industry. Originally, I was a biostatistician in my first role. And as you probably know, creating a drug, developing a drug is an incredibly lengthy and expensive process, kind of $15 billion kind of, process. It's incredibly, arduous and costly. And of course, in order to protect us, the public, the drug companies have to produce documented evidence based on trials to show that the drug is effective and safe. And these clinical trials themselves can be incredibly costly, incredibly expensive, it can be long-winded and so on. So what happens in the pharma industry now is, which is quite exciting, is that people are increasingly using prescriptive analytics and simulation to sort of design more effective, efficient trials. And that means less patients or less risk, if you like, to the people in that patient group and in the study, but also in terms of kind of like shortening the time to the release, if you like, which helps us in the public as well. And the way they do this is a few different ways. Firstly, they are able to essentially use insight and wisdom gained from previous trials to inform new trials, so that can reduce the trial size generally. But also, they use prescriptive analytics to understand where the optimal, if you like, points, if you like, on the surface of knowledge that you want to actually kind of gather data. So instead of gathering lots of data in one place, you can spread that out and so on. So you can essentially get more information, more insight, but using smaller trials and quicker trials and so on. And that's really compelling. Okay, so I hope that was useful. Obviously, that was just a small snapshot of the Nevermind, the Buzzwords presentation. If you're interested in seeing more of this, then this is obviously part of our Art of the Possible series. And these set of workshops and presentations are really geared around helping an organization to understand the possibilities and the language of data and analytics to be able to enable them to identify the right opportunities and, of course, generate value from data in a kind of repeatable way to really support your transition to a more data-driven organization. So, as I said earlier, my name is Richard Pugh. If you want any more information on this, please do feel free to get in touch. My contact details and the company's contact details are on the screen here. And I hope that was enjoyable, and thank you very much for listening.